So I'm a hypocrite, and on today, an important day in American history, I thought I'd talk about how it is that for some reason, even though I'm not necessarily that concerned about where a guitar is made, all my kind of main guitars are made in America, built in America. You know, I wouldn't say any of my main guitars are built even in Japan, let alone Indonesia or wherever like that. So what is actually going on when, as I say, for me personally, I think there's no reason that a guitar built in Japan, Indonesia, if they're built well and built by people who care what they're doing with good parts, there's no reason that they couldn't necessarily be just as good as an American guitar.
This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
Yeah, I was chatting to Chris on Instagram, and he was talking about he's got a Music Man cutlass which is an American-made guitar. And actually, this links in a little bit with me, because my first American guitar was a Music Man Silhouette. So basically, I think this is probably, I guess, true for most of us, that we kind of start playing guitar. And for me, it was years before I'd have anything with Fender on the headstock or anything like that. I had a used Ibanez Roadstar 2 that my dad found for me, that we bought used for maybe like £100. Actually a really respectable guitar looking back to start on, and I think would smoke any of the Squires that I have tried these days. But yeah, so that would have been like an 80s made Ibanez, made in Japan, and to be honest, a really good guitar to start playing on, for me at least. Then I would have moved to like an Ibanez RG7620, which was, of course, as you know, like a Japanese 7-string guitar with a Floyd Rose. I bought that used for £400 at the time, which was quite a lot of money for me back then, living and working on a farm for my dad. I used to get £1 a day for getting the cows in to milk the cows, if you're interested. You're not. Anyway, and then I think beyond that, I then got like an Ibanez SZ320, which I think were Korean made at the time, and Korean guitars back then were a little bit cheaper than Japanese, I guess, still as they are to this day. And then I think just before I went to university, I had some money because my parents gave me some money for doing quite well on my exams. And I thought, right, I'm not going to have any money by the time I get to university. This could be my last opportunity to actually buy a guitar. Oh, how wrong I was. It turns out that having any money actually has nothing to do with how much gear you actually buy. But the Ernie Ball Music Man Silhouette, and that was a guitar that I bought, I think, basically because I was a fan of John Petrucci, but could definitely not afford a full-on John Petrucci model. So that was when I got my first American guitar. Then I bought a G&L Legacy. At the time, it was really quite affordable to import a guitar from America over to here because the pound was quite strong. So I think about £700-800 is what I paid for a brand new G&L Legacy, white one of those, and that was actually what I made my first ever YouTube video on. So yeah, that's basically been my history with American guitars, and it's pretty much every one of my gigging guitars since then has been American made, I think. So what is that about? And so Chris was saying, you know, based on what you've said, like, how come would you ever consider like selling your main guitars for something like the PRS SE DGT, which is of course Indonesian made? And I think for myself, if I was going to go down this route, I think the Japanese guitars might be where I might settle. So Tokai, for example, make really good stuff, and they're of course Japanese. There are other great Japanese manufacturers like FGN, Fujigen, and is it Edwards, I think, as well. Yeah, so there are other great options. I don't quite know why it is, to be honest. So for me, I think there is an attachment to me with the Gibson and the Fender name. Although I don't own any Fender guitars at the moment, that would be, I think, the most iconic guitar for me, like a Fender Strat. The reason that I play K-Line Strats now is because at the time I was looking for like a Fender custom shop type instrument, and the K-Line Springfield came up and it was like 800 odd pounds. So that was a really affordable way for me to get like a custom shop type instrument without spending sort of at the time $2-3 grand. That remains, I guess, the case, except for K-Line guitars are now a little bit closer to the custom shop prices. So you might be able to get one for like £1,700, £1,800 used or something like that. I don't really know quite why it is. When I look at this, so this is a Tokai. I've done a few videos for Rose Morris, who are the UK distributors for Tokai, and they're honestly very quality. If there was one thing like about this guitar, it feels a little bit heavier than I'd like, and the other thing is that it's got a poly finish. I quite like the headstock. It does have that little nib in the middle to adhere to, you know, legal things, like you can't actually use the Gibson headstock, the open book in the UK, without reprisals from Gibson. But actually playing it is fantastic. It's, yeah, as I say, about £10, I think, a little bit heavier than I'd like. Maybe this rosewood board is a little bit lighter than the most perfect Les Paul might be. And because it's a poly finish, it's going to basically look like this forever. And I think this is one of the things with the Tokais from the 80s that are really, really pretty fantastic guitars. Unfortunately, a lot of them came with a poly finish, which doesn't really age in quite the same way as Nitro. And I think that's part of what's going on here. But there are a very small amount of Japanese guitars that actually have done the same thing as like a Gibson or a Fender, where they kind of increase in value over time. And those are like the Greco Super Real things. So those are, I think, Nitro in the main, have the Greco Dry Z pickups in them in the main, and are actually really, really, really high quality guitars. If you look up some of the lore about how those came to be, those are some examples of guitars that I think will follow the little bit of the trend that some of the really good Gibsons have followed, where like over time they kind of just keep increasing in value, and some of the Fender stuff as well. Whereas I think most of the Japanese guitars, like your average run-of-the-mill Tokai, is not going to do that same thing. So it's like Greco, and some of the Tokais, like the Tokai, springy sounds, some of those, like the all-nitro ones, some of those actually increased in value quite nicely too. But in general, you kind of stuck with a thing that is not also even necessarily going to hold its value very well once you've bought it. Like, they kind of plummet in value. You can pick up Tokais for really good money. A few people that have actually gigged them, John Sykes from Whitesnake and Thin Lizzy. I think Stevie Ray Vaughan even used the Tokai for a little bit. I think his wife, there was a bit of a mix up there, and he ended up using Tokai for a while. There are probably some other key players, but yeah, generally American seems to have been like the dominant superpower in guitar building forever. And even someone like me who doesn't necessarily believe that it has to be American to be quality has ended up falling into this anyway. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Do you have like builders from across the world that you hold in high esteem? I think for me personally, like a Fender off the shelf these days is not necessarily anything I would choose over, say, a Tokai off the shelf. How do you feel on that sort of as a choice? I think about 30% of you guys watching this will be American, based on, I looked up some stats because Sweetwater asked me to share that the other day. But yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts. I think America still is the dominant kind of superpower in guitar building, but does that necessarily have to be the case? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you have to play American? Have you ended up playing American? Once you get to the point where you can afford American, do you ever go back? Or are you happy playing some of these kind of Japanese guitars, Indonesian guitars? I'd love to know your thoughts and what you think. Cheers for stopping by.